Welcome to Next Steps, a podcast from Black Hawk Church in Madison, Wisconsin, where together we'll take next steps to grow in our relationship with Christ, to be formed into the kind of people He's created us to be, and to better love and serve those around us. Let's jump in.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to week 2 of our podcast series on the book of Revelation. I'm Tiffany, Malloy, and joining me this week is my co-host, Chris Kopp. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. You know what? We survived the plague like a few weeks ago, so we're healthy on the other side of that. I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate. It seems to be, there's a lot of stuff going around, right?
Yeah, we just, half of our family's done with it, and I think the other half is just getting it, so we're in the middle of the plague right now.
Great.
Good.
Great.
Well, today we have one of our favorite teaching pastors, Charles Yu, joining us. And today we are talking about a topic that is closely related to the book of Revelation. We are talking about the invisible realm. And so if you've been around Black Hawk for a while, you might remember that we did a whole sermon series on the invisible realm. I think it was 2018 is when we did that, which feels like just a moment ago, but that was actually 7 years ago, which is wild. But obviously, many of you have not been around that long, or even if you have, it's a long time ago, so we may not remember everything about that series. And so we just wanted to revisit this topic because having some more of this background knowledge is going to be helpful as just to kind of make sense of the book of Revelation. And so, Charles, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Okay, well, let's jump in. Waste no time. So first, what is the invisible realm? We, in different sermon series, you might hear us throwing around that term. So
yeah. So here's the thing. We tend to think about God creating us humans, and we live in a humanistic world where humans dominate this world. And so that's kind of the world that we're familiar with, human society and everything else. And then we say, hey, there's a God who created all this, and he's up there doing something. And the idea of the invisible realm is like, actually, there's a lot more to this world than you know about. There's a lot more creatures than we see. We see other human beings, we think God, we think maybe a few angels. Actually, when the Bible starts talking about the invisible realm, it talks about a lot, many heavenly beings. Heaven is a crowded place. The idea is that God created beings before humans. And these beings, like humans, they're persons in the sense that they think, they plan, they have ideas, they have emotions, and they have choice to follow God or not follow God. And so what we have are these lots of beings, and they're doing all kinds of interesting things that we don't see, and we don't know what's going on with them. And they see us, and they're kind of interacting with us in interesting ways. That's the idea of the invisible realm.
So it's not like, what's that movie? I See Dead People. Like, that's what I really thought.
Yes.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
I felt like for a moment that we're like in a zoo and there's people just observing us, which
that's an interesting
But they're
image.
observing us and interacting with us. That's interesting.
They are observing and interacting us in strange and unexpected ways. And the Bible has places where it's explicit about that, a lot of places where it's kind of subtle about that. But one of the things I want to clarify, and I think this is one of the top questions that came up back in, 7 years ago, which is, wait, if you have all these spiritual beings, do we just have a lot of different gods, right? The idea of kind of a polytheism question came up. And I just want to clarify. When we say there's only one God, when we say monotheism, what we mean is there's only one God who is the creator God of the universe. And this God, the God we worship, is unlike any other being, heavenly or earthly. He is so far apart that is really just one being and then everything else. They're completely on opposite ends. And so we have one God who is truly supreme, almighty over everything, every other being. And then we have a bunch of earthly beings and a bunch of heavenly beings. And they're kind of bunched up together in their capacities and their essence, so on and so forth. So we believe in one true God. But the Bible will mention gods in various places. And that's what they're talking about. They're talking about these divine beings.
Yeah, so walk us through some of those places in the story of the Bible. I hesitate to ask you to do that. You've taught an entire course on the story of the Bible, so maybe not the entire story, but where are we getting some of that from? Where are there examples?
How long do you have?
Right?
Okay, well, we can get started. I think here's the thing to remember. Okay, when we start talking about the Bible as a story, I always talk about foreground and background, right? When you start looking at a foreground, if you look at the Old Testament, the foreground is God and his people. God, Adam, Adam and Eve, and then, you get Noah, and then you get to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Judah, and then you get to Moses, and you get the whole people of Israel. That's really that's at the foregrounding of the story. And then when you get to the New Testament, you have Jesus, disciples, Paul, the churches. They're kind of the main characters, the main storyline. They're in the foreground. But then there is a background. And this is the interesting part, because you know about how foreground and backgrounds work, is that to really understand the foreground, you need to understand the background. Mm-hmm. And the background is because many times we just kind of assume. The author's assuming the readers know about this. And when you know about this, the foreground really pops, and we really understand what's going on. But because today, I think we don't understand the background as much. And so a lot of the invisible realm stuff is very much in the background, even though people all assume you know. I mean, the readers are supposed to know all this. That's in the Old Testament. And if you notice when we move to the New Testament, what's in the background becomes much more closer to the foreground. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by that. It's going to take a long time. Sorry, but that was an intro. I was at a person who said,
now people know what it's like to be on the teaching team. We just sit and listen to all of these things. It's really good. No, keep going.
I talk in paragraph form. So let's start with Genesis 1, where God says, let us make mankind. There is your first in the background idea. Like, who's the us?
Let us make them.
Let us make them. Let us make it in our image. Mm-hmm. Who's the us? Now, I know people are like, oh, is that the Trinity? If we're going with what we always say, the Bible's not written to us before us, it's highly likely that any ancient Israelite would have thought of that as being the Trinity. They most likely would have heard that as referencing the invisible realm, or more likely the idea of a divine council. That they picture God as the emperor of the universe. God is the emperor sitting in his throne room in heaven, and he is surrounded by beings, divine beings, who are his courtiers. And they talk, and they make plans, and they serve the will of God. And so when God says, hey, let us make humans, and the being's like, oh, I don't know, is that a good idea? I mean, there's conversations about this, right? That's the idea. So right there, it's not spelled out explicitly, but it's hinted at right from the start. You see that in Genesis 3, where the snake, really smart snake, can talk for one thing, and seems to know things about the spiritual realm, and talk about, human beings become knowers of good and evil. It's like, oh, you become like us, the spiritual beings. And so there's right in the Garden of Eden, there is kind of this intersection between the divine realm and the earthly realm. Mm. Genesis 6 is a fascinating passage that's just really weird about sons of God and daughters of men, and there's still controversy over that. Like, what is that about? Can divine beings marry human beings and produce children? Is that really a thing? Mm-hmm. And then we get hints of that in the New Testament, that talks about that. It's like, okay, that's weird. And then I think some of the biggest places you see showing up in the storyline would be, for example, 1 Kings 22. Micaiah is one of the prophets, and he says, I'm in the divine council, and I'm seeing various spiritual beings competing before God to be the person who want to go to the earth and mislead the king and lie to the king. It's like, wait, what is happening here? You have God is like auditioning angels who's fighting for the opportunity to lead a king astray. And Micaiah's like, that's an interesting view I'm seeing about God, right? We see this divine counsel in Isaiah 6. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And God's up there going, who will go for us? And Isaiah says, I'll go. And generally a bad idea to volunteer before you know what the job is. Okay, I won't get into that, but Isaiah basically volunteers to be the bearer of bad news, proclaimed the destruction of his own country. And then you have Job, chapter 1, where a whole bunch of sons of God, B'nai Elohim, showing up, lining up before Yahweh, and Yahweh's like, okay, what about this? What about this? Having conversations. So these images of divine counsel, the images of divine beings are kind of all over the place. And there is, for example, even a more just keep going.
Mm-hmm, yes.
There's a fascinating one. Deuteronomy 32 is a fascinating, 32:8, where the Bible talks about how God divides human beings into nations based on the number of the sons of God. Now, I know if your NIV would say sons of Israel, and that's because we believe that the Masoretic text, that the Hebrew text, has been amended to say sons of Israel. That the original, we can see it in Dead Sea Scrolls, also in the Septuagint, actually says sons of God. The idea is that God was assigning nations to different spiritual beings. Hey, you guys can worship that one. You guys can worship that one. I get to keep Israel. Israel's my inheritance. Oh. Right? And once you get that idea going on, you go, wait, what? That God was assigning various nations to worship their own divine beings, but the true God is the God of Israel. Once you get that idea going on, then you think, oh, wow, Psalm 82 starts to make a whole lot of sense. Psalm 82 is where God shows up among the divine council, and he says, you guys are gods, but you guys suck. You guys do not do justice. I'm killing all of you. It's kind of like God's like challenging, saying, the other divine beings, you're messing up, and I'm going to destroy you. And when we get to the New Testament, all of a sudden, what's in the background pops into the foreground. And we get Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, you just get Jesus casting out demons left and right. And like people like, oh, you're like, what can you say about Jesus? Well, I say he's an excellent exorcist. He is the greatest exorcist ever. And he is just doing it nonstop. Because all of a sudden, the New Testament, we realize the enemy isn't other human beings. The enemy is actually the demonic forces, the beings in the spiritual realm who are opposing God and intentionally leading God's people astray. And that shows up in Ephesians, and that ultimately, of course, shows up in the book of Revelation.
Which is where we are right now. So tell us, how does this look in the book of Revelation?
Well, we're going to see some of that. Well, first of all, we're going to get a great view. Actually, is this going to be after the Sunday comes out? So you will have already heard my talk on this Sunday coming. Yep. Okay, I'm talking to the future. Sorry, but we start with the Revelation 4:5. And we're going to get a view of divine counsel. We're going to see God in the throne room and all these angelic beings and spiritual beings and weird non-humanoid beings giving worship to God, and they're going to talk and have a conversation about what they're going to do. And there's worship and everything else. But then Pastor Chris is going to talk about Satan, the dragon, which really the snake in the Garden of Eden has been identified as Satan by the New Testament by the time we get there. And we're going to see this dragon fighting against God and against God's people. And so the Revelation is really this main storyline. What was in the backdrop in the Old Testament now comes to the absolute foreground in the book of Revelation. And I think one of the most fascinating things about the book of Revelation is that the power of the demonic realm is expressed through institutions and political power. And that's one of those things where, like, I think we're a little unfamiliar with, because we're not used to thinking about governments and cultural powers and geopolitical and socioeconomic powers as being demonic. And that's where the book of Revelation goes. So
interesting.
Yeah, tell us more about that, because probably for a lot of us, when we think about demons or evil or that kind of thing, or the work that Satan's doing, we think of personal sin and all kinds of other things. And it's not that it's not also that, but yeah, like you said, we don't think of it in terms of economic exploitation and violence and all of that. So how is it that Revelation speaks about those kinds of things? What do we do with that?
Yeah, no, that's very good. Here's the thing, though. When you look at the Old Testament, right, you see the storyline of humans keep rebelling. And it doesn't matter what God does. I mean, he can create a Garden of Eden for humans to live at. He can say, hey, here's the promised land you're going to live at. I'm going to give you amazing ancestors like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Judah. I'm going to give you great leaders like Moses and Joshua. None of it matters. The people keep turning away from God. And there is that question, I think the Old Testament that poses is, what exactly is wrong with humans that they can't follow God? Or maybe what is wrong with God that humans don't want to follow him? And I think the New Testament answer is actually much more complicated, because sin, not merely as things we do wrong, not merely as broken human nature, but sin as a power, satanic, demonic power, has enslaved humanity. Right? So that's actually kind of the primary understanding of where humans are in the New Testament. Humans are enslaved by the power of sin. We can't get out. We can't follow God even if we tried, and we did try. And even if we're told exactly who God is and what to do, Paul says, actually, when I read about what I should be doing, the instinct inside me is I'm going to actually go exactly the opposite, because that's how enslaved to sin I am. That's how pathetic I am. And so he's really getting at the sense of being trapped. So you're absolutely right. The New Testament, by foregrounding the power of sin and power of demonic influence in our lives, tend to point our eyes to the individual, right? How we're broken. But the book of Revelation says, hey, don't forget. Don't forget that the brokenness of our society, of the human world, isn't just on the individual, it's on the societal level. It's on the, like you said, socioeconomic exploitation. It's on slavery. On I would say, racial tension, racial oppression, on status hierarchy, wealth, on the distortion of body image, on today. I'm going to get in trouble for saying things like this, but on the massive distraction of humans. Because
say more about that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, doom scrolling on your phone, TikTok, social media. We are so overwhelmed by data and ideas that we can't really focus anymore on living our lives and having good relationships. Who's creating that? There's powers that create technology. There are powers that are creating content. And these powers, according to the book of Revelation, are demonic in nature. Because what they want to do is to destroy humans' ability to image God. And if all we do is spend our time watching videos of things, and look, watching videos of things is not sinful in and of itself. It's when you do it for 4 hours straight that something has gone horribly wrong.
When it takes over your life and your relationships and your...
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to keep going. Look, I mean, how many people listen to this podcast?
Well, that's a good question. At least the three of us.
We're having fun,
So
we're here
because
for
you
it.
think about the streaming that's going on. I mean, look, I go home and I binge shows. Like, okay, how much of time and energy is sucking down my attention, right? It's being sucked into these things. I look at sports. I look at more and more. I think sports is becoming one of those things that is like really taking in the allegiance and the energy of people. I look at the rise in gambling that's really now pervasive in our culture. And I go, wow, this once upon a time was kind of a frowned upon thing in Christian circles. Now it's like, no, go ahead, destroy your life. Go right ahead. And we're going to make it all available to people. Who's making those decisions, right? What powers are making decisions to make gambling pervasive in our culture and making it like this is a cool thing to do? Okay. There are powers that are changing our culture in profound ways. And Book of Revelation says, you got to watch out for them. You got to start identifying them because they're getting into your life without you realizing it.
It's powerful.
Yeah, and like at some level, when we're caught in the middle of those things, like, why did I just scroll Twitter until midnight when I could have and should have been doing other? Like we sense that there's deeper power. There's something happening that has control over us, or when it comes to addiction or different things. And so yeah, Revelation is giving us a picture of the systemic nature of some of those things, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that's a common misconception, because people think, oh, let's worry about the occult. Now, first of all, don't dabble with the occult. I mean, I think what we have learned is it is very clear that when you dabble with the occult, you open yourself up to the demonic realm. So, I mean, crystals, tarot cards, Ouija boards and stuff like fun and games. Okay, staying away from those things just make good sense. But what the book of Revelation reminds us is, if you just think that's what's going on, you're safe, then no, because the primary power of the demonic realm is in its ability to deceive, in its ability to make something look attractive and good, but in the end pulls you away from who God made you to be. And so, yeah.
Well, what are some other misconceptions you think that we have about the invisible realm, or things that we get wrong?
It's interesting. I look at the storylines of Jesus casting out demons, and I'm sometimes surprised by the demons' interaction with Jesus. And like, for example, there's the one in which they're like, okay, don't send us out, please. They're begging Jesus not to send them out. It's like, wait, you can do that? Like, demons can please don't hurt me, Jesus. Like, wait, really? Like, you think demons are all evil, right? They're tough. No, they're like, please don't hurt us. Please don't hurt us. They're like, huh. So they recognize Jesus, the Son of God, and they can actually be hurt by him. Vulnerability. And then it's like, hey, don't send us out. How about the pigs over there? Okay, go send them to the pigs. Like, they're actually negotiating. So things to think about. Not just demons, but divine beings. They're not omniscient. They're not like God. God knows everything. The rest of them don't. In fact, the rest of them are quite confused about things. And they have questions about things. They're like, why is God doing this? They're confused. They might have mixed allegiances. They're complex like humans. They make mistakes. They misread you, what you're doing. So you start thinking on those lines, like, oh, wow, they're very much persons like us. And they do a variety of interesting things. And this is why you get into some fascinating things about, for example, in the book of Job. It's clear from reading the book of Job that what happens to Job is God trying to convince the Satan, one of the spiritual beings, of something. It's like, oh, what's happening with humans is actually God saying, hey, I want to show something to people in the divine realm.
Wow.
Well, not people, but beings in the divine realm. And you think, okay, is that the only place? Well, actually, no, it shows up in Ephesians 3. Paul actually says, hey, the multicultural church is to show the powers, the spiritual beings, the manifold wisdom of God. It's like, whoa. So it's a bi-directional interaction between the earthly realm and the divine realm, where the divine realm is doing things to us, but we're doing things to them. We just don't know what we're doing, but somehow we're affecting them. And then Paul says, hey, eventually, you know what? You need to know who you are, but eventually you're going to judge angels. That eventually there's going to be a mutual meeting coming together of all the realms. We're going to see and be able to perceive these heavenly beings, and we're going to reign. Is the New Testament suggesting that we will actually reign over these divine beings in some ways, which is a really strange thought for us. So all of these are kind of like, because I think common misconception is we put demons and angels so far above us. And what I'm trying to do is bring them a bit to our level. And maybe, I think Paul is saying, maybe slightly below you eventually, which is a very strange thought.
Well,
So many questions. So good. Okay.
you all think we do this podcast for you, but actually Tiff and I are we're learning right along with everyone else.
I have
so
some
it's great.
questions to ask off the off the air, actually. I'm like, oh, I don't know. This is so interesting. Okay, so Charles, when we think about, kind of pull back and think about the invisible realm, and we think about, okay, how do we live our daily lives? Like what could or should change in light of some of the things that you're talking about? I mean, I think you talked about one thing is, hey, just being aware that like there is this invisible realm that we're interacting with and we don't even quite know it sometimes.
Yeah.
And being aware of kind of the those sorts. But what else? One thing that I was thinking about was prayer. Thinking about the importance of that in the midst of this all. So say more about.
So that's an interesting thought, right? Because I think one of the great questions people always have is like, hey, does prayer change anything? It becomes a conundrum if you think God is entirely alone in the heavenly realm, which means prayer changes what God does. Does prayer affect divine beings? Once again, we're talking about the bidirectional effects.
Yeah.
Do we affect things in the divine realm? And I think prayer is one of those things where once you open yourself to the possibility that, wow, there's a lot of beings out there. This is a very full world. Heaven is full of beings. And we're not talking about humans. Suddenly prayer, the roles of prayer that it can take on changes, and the possibility becomes infinite almost. I also think about really paying attention, because if we're living in the earthly realm and we're just kind of like flowing along, we're not seeing what the divine realm is doing to us. And if we're supposed to eventually one day judge the angels, we need to become people who can actually perceive. Okay, so this is I'm challenging.
How do we do that?
And this is where I'm challenging us in terms of our spiritual discipline to expand our horizon, our imagination about what it means to follow Jesus. Right? We're talking about, hey, there's these spiritual beings, and we're important in God's plan. I'm always trying to push people. You're partnering with God. You're sons and daughters of God. So you're a much bigger deal than you realize. Now, so know that you're intended to reign in the future. How do you prep for it? Even the self-identity, the self-concept, like, hey, I'm supposed to be this kind of a person. I'm supposed to interact with spiritual beings, or even being aware of what they're doing. Opening yourself up to that kind of spiritual awareness. Holy Spirit, spiritual beings, recognizing what is happening in the world around us, and don't take the surface level as the answer, and keep pushing.
Like
in
seeing
your prayer.
beyond.
Try to see beyond. Yes, try to see beyond. I know that's kind of crazy thought.
Or this idea of discernment. I mean,
Yes.
Exercising kind of that gift of discernment.
Recognizing what are the spirits doing. Yeah, what are the beings? Are there beings affecting us? Are there powers affecting us? I think even I think talking about look, I'm going to say, so this is probably, you might have to cut this. I sometimes say, okay, now I'm going to sit on the toilet and I can watch shorts, because that's a very short amount of time. What ends up happening is that I'm on the toilet for an hour, and that's really bad.
You and every other man in the United States. So there you go. We all know what you're doing.
But I tell myself I'm limiting, but I'm not.
Spiritual time.
It's spiritual time. And I talk about this not as somebody who's like, oh, I have no problem with that. No, I have massive problem with that, because I'm wired now to want that. I need this. When I sit down, I just want to look at this thing and suddenly it never stops. Can we recognize the powers in that and go, oh, this is, whoever designed this, they're good. You can say humans did it. Yeah, humans did it, yes. But there's demonic forces behind the humans, powers that actually made this kind of capability possible. Anyway, I'm picky on this.
Well, I'm thinking about even spiritual practices, this daily practice in different ways to tune yourself to the Spirit and to God's movement in your life and in the world around you. And so as we kind of practice these things and are more attuned, then I think we're going to be able to better see things that don't line up to what we understand who God to be or what he desires in the world. And maybe that is a way of helping us to even grow in discernment or...
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. The idea is that we're not it's not that we don't care about becoming a better person. We do, but that's one dimension, which is, oh yeah, I'm an angry person. I need to stop doing that. Oh, I have addiction to this. I need to stop that. Okay, get it. There is the other side, which is, hey, everything you see is visible. God, help me to see what I don't see. That's a question you can ask in prayer.
That's a great prayer.
It's a great prayer. Help me to see what's going on in my life that's a result of powers of this earth, power of the air that Paul talks about, that we're struggling not against flesh and blood, but against the power of this present darkness. That's Paul talking about this. In Revelation term, it's power of the dragon, the power of Babylon. Where is that in my life? Where's that in my family? Where's that in the society around me? Help me see, and help me see what your angels are doing. I want to see good and evil. I want to see all of it. And I don't want to just read about it in the book of Revelation, right? I want to be able to become people who are attuned with God and attuned with the spiritual realm.
It makes what you were saying about distraction earlier like even more powerful, because if we can't even be attentive to what's happening right in front of us with what's visible and like reflective and self-aware, well, we also need to be like invisible realm aware too. And so if we can't even do that's just like baseline, like being aware of, the things that are happening right around us, let alone in the invisible realm. So yeah, there's great victory for the enemy in distracting us from those things and not being able to be attentive to those. So man, that's helping to connect some dots for me. So thank you.
That's good. So Charles, you've given us a lot. This is so good. If people want to learn more, what are some resources that you know of that people could kind of tune into and dive into?
If you're kind of a Bible nerd like me, you go with Mike Heiser's books. He has a couple out. I think you can, and also articles out. He's done. He did a lot of work. He passed away, unfortunately. Mike Heiser was a friend, colleague here at UW when we went to grad school together. He's always been really interested in this side. We had a great conversations. I learned so much from this person. So he's a devout follower who thinks about things in very different ways, and I think he will open up whole new worlds for you. I also think Bible Project would be very helpful. I think there's Bible Project on spiritual beings. Mm-hmm. I would look those up. Tim Mackey, and also from you. This is all UW people.
You guys are all hanging out.
We all knew each other, and so Tim, Mike Heiser. I don't know. They probably met up later. So yeah, but this is for people who read the Old Testament and try to read it carefully and connect with the New Testament. This is a significant part of biblical knowledge. The background makes the foreground pop, and like I said, in the New Testament, what's in the background becomes part of the foreground. And if we don't see it, you really have to work really hard to not see it, especially in the Gospels and then Revelation. So.
Yeah, I think probably as we learn and as we become more aware, just reading through Scripture, things will pop out at us that maybe didn't before. So it'll be a fun way to kind of put this in practice.
Tiff, can I put you on the spot for a second?
Yes, okay.
As our pastor of spiritual formation, what do you, are there specific spiritual practices? You hinted at some of them, like prayer, but are there other things that come to mind for you that could help us grow in this area or in awareness of these kinds of things?
Yeah, I think I think just the act of retreating away from kind of the noise of life and the busyness of life, and in the stillness of noise and content, kind of these daily or weekly, monthly, yearly rhythms that we can put into our lives to help us to learn how to be okay without the kind of constant stream of content, and unaddict our brains from those needs. I think that's probably one of the biggest ones in our day for right now that we could practice in this way.
How about Sabbath? You've mentioned that. I feel like I've learned a lot from you about how you try to be attentive to that. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, for me, I have a weekly rhythm of Fridays. In the church world, Fridays are a day off for many of us, and so I try to unplug from everything. And one of my favorite parts of the week is after I drop my kids off at school, I have 2 cups of hot tea. So I do one and then refill it because you can't waste a tea bag. You gotta you gotta get 2 cups out of it. But I try to sit. I don't want to listen to things. I don't read something. I'll do that later on in the day. But it's a time that God and I just sit together, and sometimes it's 45 minutes of like my mind wandering, and unproductive. But sometimes you feel like you hear from God in an interesting way. And so it's kind of just the time that I set apart. And then I have a yearly, or every 6 months, a rhythm of a kind of a 2 to 3 day retreat that I go in a cabin somewhere and be by myself. So it's just something just to train my heart, because I love content. I love reading. I love all these things. And so to take a break can be helpful.
I think you're putting, that's exactly it. I think the rhythm as well as the leisure behind it, I almost think it's luxurious.
Yeah, sure is.
Because you're be able to take time and go, I'm going to do nothing.
And it's sometimes the hardest part of my week, to do nothing.
Yeah.
To sit,
And what happens, it just feels like sometimes, look, it's one of those things where you can't demand God to show up. Hey, God, I'm giving you 5 minutes. Talk to me. Versus God's like, no, I'd rather talk to you over the course of an entire day. It's like rats, right? I'm gonna give you 20 minutes. I'm gonna give you 20 minutes per day. Yeah. I'm gonna slot you in. It's like, well, no. If you want to really start connecting with God and perceiving what's going on in the spiritual realm, it takes time, and there's no shortcuts, no apps to get you there.
Can't microwave that process.
No. That'd be ironic, wouldn't it? The app that for Sabbath.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, as we wrap up, any other last comments or thoughts? We'll put some of the resources that you recommended and the show notes are on our message kind of resource page. So.
Yeah, thanks for having this conversation. It was just something that we were, as the teaching team was talking, right? Something that kept popping up. I just felt like these background themes and sorts of conversations that we often get to have in the room, but wanted to be able to bring that here to the podcast and be able to talk about some of these things in a way that we can't always on Sunday morning. So yeah, it was great to be able to dig into that together.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode. And actually, throughout this Revelation series, we want to invite you to ask questions. There's going to be things that we talk about on Sunday mornings or things that you're going to be reading about as you read through the book of Revelation that you are going to have questions about. And so send those to podcast@blackhawkchurch.org, and we will take 1 or 2 episodes to answer some of those questions. There are no dumb questions. The book of Revelation can be confusing, and so don't hesitate to reach out with some of those. So, all right, you guys, well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.